So now that we optimized our little demo application here, let me dive into that stateless versus stateful or presentational versus container component thing again. Because that is really important to understand when working with React, because you'll hear it a lot. Now we're referring to stateful components when we're managing state in them, like we're doing in the app.js. We got state here and we're calling setState to change that state. Now, a functional component that manages its own state with useState would of course also be a stateful component. So stateful does not automatically mean class-based component, though historically this has been the case because React hooks like useState are a really new feature, and therefore you will still find plenty of applications where state is only managed in class-based components. Still, since React 16.8, stateful is not automatically a class-based component. It is a component that manages state, be that with state in a class or with the useState hook. Presentational, also called dumb or stateless components, historically have always been functional components, because prior to React 16.8, these functional components could not manage state. Since React 16.8, functional components can also manage state with the useState hook, but still, you want to have many presentational components in your app. And now, what is a presentational component? It is a functional component that does not manage state. Even though you could with useState, it is still a good practice to restrict yourself to a couple of components that are involved in the state management. And of course, a couple depends on how big your app is. In big apps, it can easily be hundreds of components. But the majority of your components should be presentational, stateless components. So functional components that don't manage state. Now the question, of course, is why? And the answer is, by splitting your app into container components, which is another term for these components that manage the state in your app, and the dumb presentational components, by making that split, you keep your app manageable. Because you have a predictable flow of data, you know where your state changes, that will be in a couple of components, and the other components are only there to render a nice user interface. And they only define on external inputs, on props. And that simply ensures that these components are highly predictable, that you can throw them anywhere into your application and they work if you pass the right inputs in. And as your application grows, you therefore have an easier time maintaining it. So having a lot of dumb or presentational components is a good idea. Now, of course, you definitely should not restrict yourself to one component only that does state management though. The more you work with React, the more you'll get a feeling for which component now should manage some state so that its child components get the right inputs, and which components would better be just presentational components. But again, as a rule, certainly think before you start managing state in a component. Maybe you can do it in another component and keep that component you're working on a presentational one. So that is how you should think about stateful and stateless, or container and dumb or presentational components. We also, of course, have class-based and functional components. And in the past, the difference was very easy. Class-based components could manage state, functional components couldn't. Since React 16, that changed. So what's the difference now? When should you use which?